using up quite the whole time because we really want to have answer and questions with you guys and discussions about things and areas that we can also address that are happening related to crimes of the powerful. So I will go ahead and begin and just say that, unless Victoria would like to say anything.
I just want to echo Dawn's thanks. So thanks for everybody coming. Thank you for the invitation. I'm just happy to be here. So that's all I wanted to add.
All right, so then we will go ahead and begin. As global citizens, we must call attention to the violence, harm, and crimes of the powerful that continue to run rampant across the globe. The harmful effects of neoliberalism likewise reaches every facet of life, deepening the disparate global and national wealth inequalities. There's an increasing embrace of authoritarianism and fascist ideologies. Geopolitical tensions are high, conflicts, wars, proxy wars, and occupations continue. There's rampant political corruption, increased policies targeting specific religions, ethnic groups, and marginalized populations. We see increasing surveillance of citizens, including their private information and behaviors. There's the ongoing forced displacement of populations, forced land removal, and a host of cases of collusion between states, multinational corporations, organized crime syndicates, and international financial institutions such as the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. We are at or have passed the critical juncture of no return with the climate crisis. Those states and corporations continue to primarily give symbolic lip service to the problem or greenwashing responses. And yet, regretfully, the overall focus on crime for most politicians and citizens, especially so in the global north, and the media, primarily focus on street crimes. As late David Friedrich suggests, there's an inverse relationship between the level of harms caused by some human, individual, or organization activity and the level of criminological concerns. All these crimes and harms of the powerful come with severe costs. Before getting into current examples, we're just going to briefly provide an overview of the various types of crimes of the powerful and their symbiotic nature for those less familiar. State crimes, government or regime crimes can be defined as an action or act, commission or failure to act, omission by actors within the state that result in violations of international law, domestic law, human rights broadly, or systemic and institutional social harms of its or another's population in the name of and for the benefit of the state. This definition allows us to use a semiological approach rather than a strict legal definition of crime. Corporate crime, crimes and harms committed in the name of or on behalf of the organization and or major stakeholders for a gain of the organization. State corporate crime was first defined as illegally or socially injurious actions that occur when one or more institutions or political governance pursue a goal in direct cooperation with one or more institutions of economic production and distribution. Recognizing a state's failure or direct involvement is important when we consider the collusion between governments and corporations. Under the umbrella of crimes of the powerful, there's also crimes of globalization. Though more recently, we tend to just focus on the harms caused by international financial institutions. Here, like I said, we're not talking about multinational or transnational financial institutions. Rather, we are referring primarily to the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. We would be remiss if we also ignored the environmental crimes as another type of crime of the powerful, especially so when we are talking about the systemic nature between these different entities. Having noted the main types of crimes of the powerful, we have argued that while the classification and typologizing of these types of crimes can be intellectually useful, It misses the broader symbiotic nature of the crimes, making it nearly impossible to claim one form or another has occurred. For example, it's difficult to view corporate crimes separate from the state, and in many cases, international financial institutions, and vice versa, due to the intersecting agendas of those at the top of both the corporate and state hierarchies and the multiple interlocks reflected in the movement in and out of these high-level positions within them. Disentangling corporate interests from state interests is problematic. Environmental crimes, increasingly known as green criminology or green crimes, in which states, corporations, and international financial institutions are all complicit and often acting together, is another example of how using hardened understandings of these types of crimes and harms miss the broader systems of relations. Let us move on to consider some current examples. There are those most of us are already aware of, from Iran's oppressive regime, the ongoing violence against its citizenry to quell dissent and protests, or its morality police, Afghanistan's oppression and denial of women's rights, the war in Ukraine, Syria, and a host of other civil and wars and conflicts, including this weekend, the war in Iraq against the Palestinians after the Hamas attack, China and India's military's recent devolution into hand-to-hand combat at the line of actual control, China's ongoing treatment and abuse of the Uyghurs, China's roughly 102 overseas police undeclared stations in 53 countries, spanning from the United States, Canada, the European Union, and Japan, that are all used to target Chinese citizens, or Saudi Arabia's continued human rights violations, or the recent case of the EU's corporation corruption scandal and bribery by Qatar, where roughly 1.5 million pounds has been uncovered, as well as the involvement of Morocco in the corruption scandal. The International Monetary Fund continues to demand major structural adjustment policies that are known to result in vast national debts, maximizing exports, and reductions in consumer subsidies, to name a few. World Bank projects have resulted in vast environmental harms, forced displacement of indigenous populations, and degradation of local food and water sources, to name a few. For example, the World Bank projects such as the bauxite mine in Western Guinea and the coal power plant in, probably saying this wrong, Gujarat, India, that resulted in vast pollution and damage to the local water resources. Or consider the issue of corporate greed and price gouging by corporations ranging from energy and utility sectors to medications to everyday food and household items. Companies claim the surging prices are due to supply chain issues, rising wages, and expensive fuel, forcing them to push up price. Yet, we are seeing record profits being reported. All the while, there is food instability, famine, lack of medications, etc. As shown in Oxfam's 2022 final report, soaring food and energy prices are hitting consumers the world over, but they have boosted the wealth of billionaires in these sectors by about 453 billion US dollars in the last 2 years, or about 1 billion every 2 days. The surge in billionaires' fortunes comes as food and energy companies post record high profits amid the pandemic. We see and hear about horrific working conditions across the globe, slave labor, outright abuse across industries, from the technology sector to the fashion industry to the seafood and fishing industry. At the end of 22, a Reuters investigation revealed how the Nigerian military and security forces have slaughtered thousands of children during their 13-year war on extremism. Likewise, in Yemen, more than 11,000 children have been killed or injured in the ongoing conflict backed by the United States, where the Saudis have been carrying out their attacks for the last 7 years. While we could continue to note the more obvious recent examples, we want to take some time to have you consider another area that may not be so readily thought of, with the focus on environmental crimes and corporations, and that is space expansionism. As we are aware, vast climate changes are being felt across the globe with rising temperatures, increased and intensified heat waves, drought, wildfires, tsunamis, increase in hurricane strength, the loss of sea ice, melting glaciers and ice sheets, sea levels, and extreme rainfall. Yet during the last 2022 climate change conference of the parties, COP25, states truly failed to respond to the climate crisis beyond symbolic measures. The agreement that they came to included very few provisions that would actually hasten countries to cut greenhouse gas pollution or to shift from fossil fuels, making no advance on greenhouse cuts beyond last year's climate summary. Plus, it added a hat tip to the gas. Also not a surprise, given that the fossil fuel industry sent 636 attendees to the COP27 alone. It should come as no surprise given the economic impact, lest we not forget that 4 months prior to that climate conference, the EU Commission had already labeled gas and nuclear as green transition energies, paving the way for corporations and states to fit into the EU's sustainable finance taxonomy and steering investors towards climate conscious projects. Thus, billions of euros will be sunk into technologies that actively make the problem worse. The IMF and World Bank are not exempt from this symbolically addressing the climate crisis. A 2022 audit of the World Bank by Oxfam found issues with its climate financing sector. The International Climate Policy led at Oxfam stated that the audit exposed the danger that some climate finance claims could simply be greenwashing. While the United States claims to lead the way in climate change action, it consumes 20 million barrels of crude oil a day. It should also be noted it has significantly boosted its crude oil base, where it exports to other nations now at a record of 3.4 million barrels per day, with exports of about 3 million barrels per day of refined products like gas and diesel fuel, a leading contributor to the climate crisis. We find it ironic and further examination that the accelerating climate crisis is often touted as a rationale for space expansionism. The justification of preventing species extinction and addressing the current climate crisis is that of space expansionism. It becomes a shiny veneer that covers the real focus, that of economics, or what has been termed natural capital. Natural capital calls for the investment in natural resources and the supporting infrastructure to prevent further depletion of environmental resources. This is based on the deeply held ideological understanding that no organized economic system can long endure without the flow of renewable and non-renewable resources into account. Yet the ideological underpinnings of neoliberal capitalism disregard this understanding, asserting that the limitations of the natural world can be bypassed by human ingenuity and capital investment. However, such an approach overlooks reliance on environmental resources essential to human existence: clean air, water, fertile soil, a healthy ecosystem, all are which finite resources that are rapidly being depleted. A retrospective examination of the harmful impact that capitalist ventures have had and continue to have on the environment illustrates the embedded nature of this mindset. Likewise, while countries across the globe have heralded their efforts of addressing the climate crisis by reducing CO2 and methane levels during 2022, that same year was said to have kicked off the golden age of space exploration as we entered the new space age. Regardless of the real and potential environmental harms this poses, the United States, China, and India and Russia's space expansionism space weaponization, and commercialization race pose increasingly environmental harms and further degradation to our climate. The forces and interests driving space expansionism have also dramatically changed given the billionaires' race to space and the commercial space economy. The increasing private investments in space and the encouragement by governments that corporations and private interests further national territorial claims or to foster the development of high-value jobs, especially in the zone of low Earth orbit or medium Earth orbit, as well as enhancing their military or defense-oriented presence. As argued by Sharman, we are allowing and promoting capital exploitation to escape Earth at unprecedented levels. It is not a matter of when or if we should be in space, as the saying goes, that ship has sailed, as capitalist logics are used to justify space expansionism, as well as the current and anticipated harms that have resulted. Simply, neoliberal logics have allowed for and facilitated the current space race, one that has expanded beyond state interest to include and promote for-profit private interest. This is despite the glaring reality that the only private interest in state governments with the most resources benefit both physically and personally, while the rest of us, as global citizens, equally undertake the risks of harm. The space economy is now a $469 billion industry. During 2022, there were 186 successful rocket launches compared to 145 in 2021 by states, notably the United States, China, Russia, India, and Europe, as well as corporations, notably SpaceX, Blue Origin, and Virgin Galactic, and Relativity Space. Consider that SpaceX alone launched 61 rockets during 2022, roughly one in every 6 days. Likewise, by the close of 22, the global space sector had attracted private equity investments of about 272 billion US dollars into 1,791 unique companies just since 2013. The increased interest has driven the cost of launches into the low Earth orbit, which in turn drives the associated costs, which attracts further investments. Private interest view space as a resource for development as it relates to tourism, manufacturing, energy generation, mining, hyperspectral remote sensing, and human colonization beyond Earth. As Taylor stated, the cosmos is a theater of strategic muscle flexing among the major powers, a no man's land subject to unilateral grabs by commercial interests, and a playground for billionaires with money to burn. Consider the environmental harms of the machinations of production of space expansionism that includes the supply chain process for rockets, satellites, probes, and space stations. Space rockets are also pivotal to space expansionism. Transportation of supplies and materials results in more reliance on the fossil fuel industry. This also leads to further environmental emissions, the release of carbon dioxide, methane, and other toxic waste. Rocket fabrication requires vast amounts of supplies and resources that are needed to build the various systems and components. For example, precious minerals and metals must be extracted and processed from aluminum, titanium, magnesium, carbon composites, fiber, nickel, chromium, silicon, just to name a few for the rocket structure. Beyond this, the rocket requires thousands of other parts, components, and equipment, from the basics of wires, connectors, data chips, processors, semiconductors, guidance and air systems, to multiple engines, thrusters, propulsion systems, and rocket fuels. Beyond rocket production, there are pre-launch tests to final launches that, as we discussed below, do not always succeed, leading to damage to our ecosystems. The same is true for the successful launches as well. There have been recent fuel leaks, including methylhexane during the scheduled SpaceX Dragon spacecraft liftoff in late June of 2022, a liquid nitrogen leak into the Texas wetlands around the SpaceX launch site and the subsequent test rocket launch. The Space Launch System rocket and attached Orion also had fuel leaks in July of last year, as did the Atlas rocket in 2021. SpaceX's controversial launch of its Starship, the most powerful rocket to date, caused a fire around its base and minutes later blew itself apart on the landing pad in April 2023, blasting debris, including massive chunks of concrete, tangled rebar, pebbles, boulders across the state park and beyond, including a 6.5-mile radius, scorching and burning more than 3 acres of park. The entire ecosystem that surrounded that launch pad continues to be impacted today. These environmental incidences are not isolated, as they have happened in India, China, Russia, South Korea to New Zealand in 2021 alone. Or consider the potential harm from space debris that comes back to Earth. In May 2020, China's Long March 5B rocket fell back to Earth near 2 villages in the Ivory Coast. In January 22, the Percy upper stage of a Russian Angara A5 rocket fell back to Earth when it failed to reach the intended orbit, crashing into the Pacific Ocean. Or consider when SpaceX Falcon 9 had an uncontrolled re-entry in March 2021, leaving debris on a spread across a farm in Washington, in the United States. Likewise, in the middle of June 2022, a piece of junk rocket from SpaceX Dragon spacecraft also re-entered Earth and landed in a sheep farm in southern Wales. Debris was, debris was also found in India in 2022 from a rocket launched in 2021. In 2022, China's 20-ton rocket, which stood over 10 stories in height, headed toward Earth in an uncontrolled re-entry over the Indian Ocean, leaving debris in several areas, including Indonesia and Malaysia, nearly hitting some local villages. More recently, in 2023, space debris was found on a beach in Japan, as well as near the western Australian coast. A Chinese space rocket had an uncontrolled re-entry over Texas, though evidence of any land debris has not yet been established. The tests from the re-entered junk rockets at this point that have landed on the ground have not had any or contained any radiation. Those that land in the ocean, however, are never tested. There's also an inherent environmental impact from rocket emissions to fuel consumptions, toxins, and dioxides that affect the environment. After all, rockets are unique among the anthropogenic sources due to direct injection of pollutants to all of the atmospheric layers. The number of launches per year continues to increase, as we noted, as does the environmental impact. Cumulative between 1957 through 2022, there were 14,281 objects launched into space, including satellites, probes, landers, crewed spacecraft, space station flight elements, all launched into Earth orbit and beyond. 22 was a record year, as we noted, with 186 rocket launches, and SpaceX launched 61 orbital missions, nearly double the 31 from the previous year. So far in 23, it has already launched 56 rockets, and that was as of August 2023. And then there's the United States' recent launch of the Artemis 1 moon rocket, which required 700,000 pounds of cryogenic fuel, which is a liquid hydrogen byproduct of fossil fuels. Highlighting the total prospective environmental cost of increasing launches is not yet known. What we do know as a point of reference is that the dominant rocket fuels include liquid hydrogen, methane liquid oxygen, solid fuels, hypergolic, and kerosene, which all cause significant emissions. The launch of Artemis used 537 gallons of liquid hydrogen fuel for the core stage fuel tank, and the first stage fuel held an additional 196,000 gallons of liquid oxygen fuel, making a total of over 700,000 gallons of cryogenic propellant. Consider also when SpaceX Falcon 9 heavy rocket blasts off in a plume of white smoke, hot gases shoot out of its 27 engines, creating a thrust equal to 18 Boeing 747 aircraft. And upon reaching orbit, it burns roughly 400 metric tons of kerosene alone. A study also found that the Falcon 9 rocket spewed sizable amounts of carbon dioxide directly into the atmosphere, extending 40 miles up from the launch site. CO2, as we know, is the planet heating greenhouse gas driving the climate crisis. Space rockets also release nitrogen oxides, which can interact with water to create acid rain and damage fragile ecosystems. When it comes to black carbon soot, rockets release tons of particles in the stratosphere, especially between 15 and 14 kilometers above the ground each year. This means that roughly every year, 1 gigagram or 1,000 metric tons of black carbon is released. Based on the acceleration of launches that resulted in environmental harm, is likely to increase even more. Consider also the existing bodies of trash on the moon from humans, including the historical 1971 experiment that sent a gold olive branch, a flag kit, several lunar orbiters, and a hammer and a falcon feather to demonstrate that objects fall at the same rate regardless of mass. Moon litter was left behind by NASA astronauts during the Apollo program. Old probes, lunar orbiters that crashed in the lunar crater observation and sensing satellite are still on the moon's surface. It's still happening. We have left mounds of trash on Earth, and we are continuing to do the very same thing in space. In September 2019, India's lander crashed into the moon's surface, as did Israel's Beresheet spacecraft and China's spacecraft the same year. In March of 22, a junk rocket booster believed to be from a rocket launched in China in 2014 hit the moon at the speed of over 5,000 miles per hour and exploded, possibly contaminating the moon with living microbes. We previously mentioned the recent failure of Russia's Lunar 25 lander that crashed on the moon, leaving behind more moon junk. It's not just the moon that we are exploiting and trashing. Mars is littered with, quote, 15,694 pounds of human trash from 50 years of robotic exploration. And the 18 human-made objects that have landed on the planet, debris includes netting material, thermal blankets, drill bits, discarded hardware, parts of crashed and inactive spacecraft, including more recent pieces of the Perseverance rover's protective module that is designed to be discarded after landing. There are defunct spacecraft on the surface of Mars as well, including the Mars 3 and 6 landers, the Viking 1 and 2 landers, and the rover, Beagle 2 lander, Phoenix lander, Opportunity rover, and Spirit rover. The planet's atmosphere further deteriorates abandoned and discarded spacecraft, meaning its breakoffs are scattered across the surface. Furthermore, in taking a prospective lens, consider the nuclear thermal rocket engine that NASA hopes to launch in 2027 for a crewed mission to Mars and the potential harms and risks that it poses. In the event of an explosion on or right after launching, the failure of containment alone, there could be high amounts of radiation emitted from the launch site. While NASA and DARPA plan to wait to power the reactor until it reaches a nuclear safe orbit so that any tragedy would not affect Earth, little consideration is given to the impact in space or the possible radiation dose after re-entry, Or what if something goes wrong on or minutes after launching? As Sharman rightly notes, unknowns arise, ironically, even as a side effect of the attempt to break in or to broaden the ability to control and optimize for predictability. The amount of money being invested in expanding to Mars is justified through the promise of prospective reward. The Mars exploration rover mission cost $1.08 billion US dollars. The Perseverance rover, $2.7 billion. Vikings 1 and 2 cost $7.1 billion US dollars. MSL Curiosity, another $3.2 billion. And the Mars Observer, $1.7 billion. Projections suggest that human travel to the planet would be even more costly. This comes at a time where Earth is increasingly facing climate crisis, as we noted, a fact that's incorporated into the justification for space expansionism itself, as we look to solve the depletion of natural resources through extractions of those to be found off planet, such as the asteroids, the moon, and Mars. The climate crisis is not addressed by repressing dangerous behaviors. Rather, it's incorporated into the current capitalist system. The above begs the question, why not take the resources invested in space expansionism and redirect them toward the current climate crisis? After all, our climate is in crisis, resulting in vast changes. To us, it's an imaginary social order, the entrenchment of profit-making and capital accumulation as normal and necessary. This denies the obvious challenges and flaws associated with pursuing space expansionism, specifically the oft-touted justification for the increased commercialization of space, that of the threat of saving humanity from climate catastrophe. These logics are so embedded in our social system that blindly follow the current economic order seems to be the only solution. This is hardly surprising, considering the earthbound policy solutions to climate change are also adapted to capitalism, and economic viability takes precedent over pragmatic solutions. As such, it's hardly surprising that space expansionism and its related technologies and infrastructure have been offered as part of, if not the solution, to the climate crisis. Undoubtedly, Earth and space are and will be paying the price. A great quote from a novel sums it up nicely for us. The greatest threat to our own species lies within us. Humans have long looked at space with awe, admiration, curiosity, and imagination. But at no time before did that curiosity come so close to meeting our peril and that of all of our species on Earth. And yet we continue with more rocket launches, each year fueling our climate crisis. We continue developing and testing faster rockets to get us to the asteroids as countries race to be able to get there first, to have access to the minerals and the monetary rewards, the moon, Mars, and beyond. A retrospective examination of the harmful effect that capitalist ventures have had and continue to have on the environment illustrates that space expansionism is no different. We agree with Quasi that the course of the advancement of space technology, human space travel, space exploration, including the quest to reach these precious minerals, predicts a near future conflict, warfare, and the further erosion of our conditions here on Earth due to our own anthropogenic-driven damage. As we said, the above quote that I read nicely summarizes our perspective. We do continue to be our own greatest threat to Earth, humans, and all living species. And